hasn't religion been the cause of many wars?
Well, okay, I could go through a few wars which are well known, and probably the most destructive ones are World War I and World War II. And more recently, you have the Rwanda genocide killing 800,000 people. Okay, none of those have religious causes. Then you go back a bit to things like the American Civil War and the War of Independence, no religious causes. Then you go back even further to things like the Wars of the Roses in England and the Norman Conquest, or you have around the 12th, 13th century, the Mongol conquest, which were incredibly destructive. Again, no religious cause behind those. Go back even further and you have things like the Punic Wars, Rome versus Carthage, and you have the Persian versus Greek wars. No religious cause behind those. So in fact, some scholars, Phillips and Axelrod, wrote the Encyclopedia of Wars, had over 1,700 wars they discussed, and only about 120 or so had religion as the main cause. So that's about 7% of the wars had religious cause, 93% didn't. Okay?
Very little.
And of that 7%, only about half of those were Islamic wars. Okay, so not Christian wars.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting. So 93% no religion. So you can't blame religion for most wars. And in fact, only 2% of the deaths from wars can be attributed to the religious wars.
Wow, that is very key, and I don't think people hear that very often. So then, speaking of wars and those people who cause wars and disruptions like war, what about the Crusades? Aren't they an example of the evils committed by the church?
Well, okay, the Crusades do seem to be a religious war. There may have been some idea of being a defensive war because the Muslims had been at war for hundreds of years, taking over the Middle East. In fact, a lot of think of the apostles' journeys and all that. A lot of those places now are Islamic control, but they were once Christian centers. Where Augustine was, where Athanasius was, they were Christian centers, and now they're Islamic places. But I think really that might be a religious war, but even then the deaths are often exaggerated because there's one sort of boastful story that we had enough blood to cover bridles of horses. Okay, that sounds bad, and until you realize it's from Revelation chapter 14, where it was clearly an apocalyptic exaggeration. They were quoting the book of Revelation. Everyone understood they weren't meant to be literal. Okay, but sort of hundreds of years later, people take it literally and assume, well, this is how bloodthirsty they were. But in fact, you can do the calculations. Even if you only had ankle deep blood in Jerusalem in the temple, you'd have to kill get the blood from 3 million bodies to fill that to that depth, and that's about 100 times the population of Jerusalem at the time. So scientifically it's absurd, but it was never meant to be taken literally.
Wow. If you've enjoyed watching this, you're going to want to check out Creation Magazine. You can sign up for it with a link in the description for this video, and we will send you a free gift.